All righty. One thing that I've noticed is people sending in things are the things that people are sending in are really, really thoughtful and well, really well thought out. It's exciting for me to see that. Like the ideas that people have for projects, I got a lot of people sending in several different ideas. So it'll take a little bit of time for me to go through that, but I will have something online like tonight or tomorrow morning for the first project. And I wanted to tell you what I've been looking at, what I've been seeing, and just some feedback I've gotten. There's a couple things I wanted to cover before we really go into class today. First, I hope everybody made it back safely from the Labor Day weekend. Monday is typically one of the most dangerous days during the year to drive on Utah highways, so I hope everybody was careful. Elected to drive back Sunday night, so we avoided a lot of that traffic. But when it gets past 9 or 10 o'clock, I would rather pull into a rest area and take a couple hour nap than keep driving. But that's just me. One of the things I want people to be aware of is that when people post things and I grade it, the grade is not permanent. If you are missing a point or two and you want to get more, you can go back and resubmit, make whatever changes I've pointed out in the discussion, but it doesn't hurt my feelings at all if you resubmit an assignment that you've already turned in. For the challenge moving forward assignment, I asked everybody to come up with at least one idea, and I gave a format to present that idea where you have a concise description of it, and then you use a paragraph to describe it more in detail. One thing I really appreciate is that more than any other class, everybody was paying attention to that, and they submitted their ideas in the format that I'd asked for. So I really appreciate that. I think one or two people thought that this was the project, and so they actually turned something in. But this again was just describing ideas for the projects. And going through them, there's two different categories that I wanted to talk about, and I'm writing this up, and so you should see it like tonight or tomorrow. There's two different categories I saw that everything kind of fell into, and I wanted to talk to you about the final, what the final is going to entail, because I think I have a pretty good idea of what we're going to do now. Everybody's responsible for a number of projects during the course of the term, and there's going to be 7 projects averaging 3 to 5 hours apiece. What I noticed about people's the word escaped me. Proposals, that's it. Is that the project idea proposals generally fell into 2 categories. And I'd like feedback from everybody. You probably do that via email or whatever. And Kaden, if you wouldn't mind giving me some feedback here tonight, that would be really great. Well, what I noticed is that the project ideas kind of fell into 2 general categories. And I'm calling them research and just like deep dive project learning. I actually used a much shorter term for it when I writing up the description for it. But what is the difference between them? So, well, no, it's project based and then research based, the 2 different categories. For the project based, that's going to be when you want to design a project where you actually build something or you go somewhere, do an activity. Like for this, it would be, say you want, for one of your projects, you want to go out, you're going to go to Las Vegas anyway, and you want to stop at the archaeology site. They've turned into a museum there, and just kind of talk to some of the people that work there and see if they can tell you much about gender roles from the Neolithic people that lived out there. That would be a project-based project. I'm sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up. An activity-based project. And then the research type project would be, you want to look more in depth at a specific technique or a specific group of people that you saw, or maybe a specific group of, or a specific movement or art period. And the difference between these two would be the activity-based would be rooted in actually doing something, where you're either making something or you're going on site to a museum. And the research-based would be that you do your own kind of self-directed research on one of the subjects of the project ideas that relates to this class, and then you would present your findings, and you could present your findings as either a multi-slide PowerPoint that you would videotape the PowerPoint and record yourself narrating, or you could submit it as a PDF document, which kind of walks us through your perception, so you write it down. The way that you present your activity-based project would be, you could do, edit together like a 3-minute video of you going to one of these museums, and then you explain, I'm here because it has to do with this part of the class, and this is why I selected the museum. And then you just include a couple clips of your visit while you were there, talking to people, seeing some of the things that you saw, sharing some of the things you saw. You could either do that, or you could present it as PowerPoints with images of your trip or the thing that you're doing. Or you could present it as, say you made a clay figure of something. And in that case, you would do a PDF where you'd write about why this is related to the class, and then you would share images of the thing that you've made and the process you undertook to make it. So what that boils down to is there basically be two different types of projects. The research one, where you do research, and the activity-based one, where you'd go out and do the thing. And you would have to do 2 of each style, but then the rest of the 7, you could do whatever you wanted. Mixing those up. If you are more of a hands-on person, maybe 5 out of the 7 projects are hands-on, and then 2 of them would need to be research-based. And if you're more of a research-based person, then 5 of the 7 projects could be research-based, and 2 of them would be visits to museums or sites that you found that reflect some of the things we're talking about in the class. And each of those would average 3 to 5 hours, like we talked about. But for the final, what I'm thinking is that for the final, we would all need to participate in a question and answer session. And I will figure out the logistics so that you don't all have to be on a live Teams call at the same time. So we will figure that out and make sure that everybody can participate in the final. And then the other part of the final will be a final project, which is just basically one of those, an additional project to those 7. So an 8th project that you would just spend twice as much time on, like 10 hours instead. And instead of waiting until the very end of the term to work on that, you could start working on that at any point during the term. And so I would like people to think about that, and I will write that down and send it out as well so people can kind of cogitate on it. But I'm thinking I would much rather do that than have like a final written test or anything like that. just from what I was talking about, what do you think, Kaden?
I think it's a good idea. So just make sure I got everything right. So we'd have a research and activity. Those are like the two types of projects, and you have to do one of each, right? And then you pick the rest
You would have to
however
do
you see
two of
fit.
each and then pick
Two
the
of
rest
each.
of whatever you want. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then for the final, it would be a 10-hour project, and you would just it would be whatever you wanted to do that related to the
Okay.
class. So you could do either research or you could do um, an activity.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, all right. And I think that will be good because that will give people an opportunity to get their fingers dirty a little bit. But if you are a research person, most of what you do would be research, and then you could find a way to work two activities in there. But if you're a hands-on person, then you would just have to do two research projects, and that's it. And I think thinking that's one of the things I noticed is that most people were either really interested in doing one or the other. And then people that submitted like three ideas, it was generally two of one kind and one of another. So I'm thinking that's going to be what we do to engage everybody and also make the most people happy. And I think what we'll do is we'll have like an ongoing discussion board, and we may have to figure out something else to do this, but I want to do something so everybody can share the projects that they're doing. And I'm thinking if we have labeled discussion boards that are just going to be open for the whole term, then you would just submit your projects to that so that everybody can see it. And I think that might be the best way to do it.
If
So
we had that
let's think,
discussion board,
what's that?
sorry, if we had that discussion board, would it be an opportunity, like if you put your project on there, to use your classmates as like a sounding board on ideas at all? Like if you have, say, the proposal and you're struggling on a different part, it's so like, would you be able to ask for help with your peers with that?
I think that's a really good idea. I
Okay.
like that. Okay, so what I could do is set up 8 discussion boards that are open, will be open for the entire semester. And they'll just be numbered, creatively, 1 through 8. And then number 8 will be for the final. But then if you wanted to, you could just submit your project and that's it. You don't have to have any other interaction. Or if you wanted feedback, you could submit your idea and ask for feedback. I think that's a great idea. All right, I can get those definitely set up by tomorrow night. Yeah, that's brilliant. Excellent. Very good. All right. There are a couple things that I wanted to talk about, address before we get into the meat of stuff. Thank you, Kaden. That was brilliant, by the way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime.
As you pat yourself on the back. This is okay. And I'm looking concerned because I'm trying to hit all the right um, tidbits and buttons. As we go forward, what I one thing I want people to be very aware of is, continually refer back to the 4 tools of artistic critique and use that as a guideline to evaluate to interact with the objects that we see. And one thing that we're going to do is, even though each module focuses on, for example, a period or an area of world art history, I'm going to be putting in something from what contemporary thinkers are, their perspectives as well. So we're going to have a mix of contemporary thought on gender and art, and we're going to focus on uh, historically, the presence of gender in art. So we'll have a little bit of a mix. But one thing I want people to be aware of is, as we go through, there might be things that you come across that make you a little bit uncomfortable or uneasy. And that's actually a good thing. it helps us to see a couple things. One is maybe there's something that we're being warned that, that maybe that's not a field that we want to go into in the future for future study, and that's perfectly fine. And maybe another aspect of that is maybe this is challenging some of the perceptions that we have, and that might be a good thing too. Not necessarily to always change our perceptions, but at the very least to be aware that there are differences between our expectations and what we're looking at. As you go forward with your projects, and as we look at other things, be really aware that there are, in the history of the world, there has been anywhere from 32 to 64 billion people who have born, lived out their lives, and died. Billions of people. And in all that amount of history and people leaving records behind them, evidence of their lives, there are bound to be many cultures where there are things about them that we are not comfortable with, that they took for granted. As we do that, please be really careful. If you feel there's a line that you need to be aware of, that you need to be careful as you confront that line. And that line is, are we looking at something, are we uncomfortable because we feel that it's completely wrong? Or are we uncomfortable because it challenges our expectations and our present views? And I think if something is wrong, that's something to pay attention to, but also ask yourself, do you feel that it's wrong because it challenges your expectations? So be really mindful of that. And we're going to discuss, I'm going to try to be really, really careful and sensitive to that. I don't want anybody to, I don't want to confront and challenge and get in an argument with anybody about what they believe. That's not what this class is about. But I do want people to be aware that when other people believe things or live things that are different from you, that is not an attack on your perspective, and that should not be taken as a challenge from them on you. These people that we look at, for the most part, are going to have been dead and dust for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So they form absolutely no threat to you or your worldview. What we're looking at is we're not looking at different cultures and different people so we can judge them. But we are looking at them just to see different perspectives. And that's it. So this is, how do you feel about that?
For me personally, I like hearing about like different perspectives and stuff. So I enjoy these type of classes.
Okay, all right. Because my job is not to convince you or convert you to anything different, other than to convert you to the idea that it's perfectly okay to open your mind enough to accept that other people are different. Whether or not you adopt their differences, that's not what I'm about. I just am hoping that people get convinced that it's all right to allow people to be different, and hopefully learn from them as they are being different, living their lives differently. And the reason why I point that out is that gender in art can be a real hot button topic. And if you find yourself getting upset about something that we're looking at, step back and ask yourself, why am I upset? Am I upset because I'm expecting them to be different than what they are? Or am I upset because this challenges my preconceived notions of who these people might be? Or am I upset just because this is different? I will tell one really short, very brief story. I have a habit of finding things that I don't necessarily enjoy, and then training myself to get to the point where I can enjoy them. And what I'm talking about is, for example, durian fruit. Kaden, have you ever encountered durian fruit?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, it is a fruit that grows in a pod that's maybe about twice the size of a rugby ball, sometimes, many times a little bit smaller. But you crack this fruit open and then you eat what's inside, and it has a texture of kind of custard almost, but the smell is like a cross between, it depends on the species, of course, but it's like a cross between wet dog and dirty diaper. And people eat it. When I was in my first trip to China, I was in Xiamen, which is a beautiful area where the air is really clean most of the time because you get a lot of breeze coming in from the ocean. But while I was there, I went with my translator and guide. We went up to a shrine that was up this incredibly steep set of stairs in a mountain. It was just a miserable journey all around because it was hot, high humidity. But I did everything I could to maintain a smile so that my guide wouldn't know that I was slowly dying inside. When we got to the bottom, he said, "Hey, let's go get some ice cream." And I thought, okay, great. Well, ice cream there in this area, it was a typical ice cream thing was maybe about 5 inches long and maybe about 3/4 of an inch around. So it was pretty tiny. But they had typical flavors that you might expect, like chocolate and coconut and things like that. And he said, "Well, what flavor you want?" And as I was looking at this, he was telling me, "Yeah, this is melon, this is guava," and then he said, "And this is durian." And I said, "Oh, durian?" He said, "Yeah, that's the one that smells like poop." And I said, "Well, I've got to have it." So I got durian ice cream, and as you might expect, the initial taste was pretty revolting for my sugar enhanced taste buds here in the West. But then I thought, well, wait a sec, what can I find that's in my experience that tastes similar that I can attach this to so it's not so revolting? Because I don't want to barf in front of my friend here. And it dawned on me that this tasted an awful lot. This ice cream tasted an awful lot like French onion soup. It tasted like onion soup. So I started enjoying it. And he gave me the oddest look I've ever seen and said, "You're eating that? But it tastes like poop." And I said, "Oh yeah? How would you know?" And he started laughing. But it was an unusual experience because I tried to reframe it in such a way so that I could actually enjoy what we were experiencing. And it made it for a really good memory and a really fun experience. And I made a good friend in this gentleman who took me around to the sites. I think if we can find a way to do that with things that make us uncomfortable, reframe it, whatever the experience is, in a way that makes it more palatable, then I think that opens up our capacity to. Oh, I'm sorry. The camera was off. Duh. Okay, it can reframe it in such a way so that we can enjoy the experience. One of the conversations we need to have is about words like gender and sex and about male and female gaze. Is there such a thing as a difference between gender and sex? And is there such a thing between the male as male gaze and female gaze? And I would argue that absolutely there is. In art historical studies, for the most part, gender refers to perception and sex refers to biology. And whether or not the sex act of a subject in an art historical context may change is almost irrelevant. What really is interesting to us is how gender is perceived. Do you remember what we said about who wears the dress in Mesopotamian art?
Vaguely.
a lot of the time it was men who wore kilts in Mesopotamian art, and women a lot of the time would wear the pants. It was a distinctive style of panting, and which is kind of surprising for some in the Western audience. Both genders would enjoyed wearing makeup. In general, the women were distinctive because they did not have beards, and the men did have very full, extravagant beards. And there are some other aspects too that we can see of obvious visual differences. Whether or not those visual differences are the same as the markers that we might perceive in this at this present time is well, I'll just say they're not always going to be the same. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. In Egypt, men and women both wore dresses. That was a standard thing. The dress is a term that we typically think as feminine garb in contemporary society. But even then, when a dress is worn by a Scottish Highlander, it's a kilt and it's only for men. So there are going to be different things, different ways of perceiving visual markers for gender evaluation. One thing that I see that is a trend, and I don't know if you guys have seen it as well. It's not really a trend. It's something that pops up quite a bit when people will get upset on social media because they feel that this person has been emasculated because of their clothing, or this woman has been defeminized because of her clothing. Clothing is the costume that you wear, basically. And the things that you surround yourself with, the things that you put on yourself is pretty much more related to how you identify as an individual and less restricted only to cultural expectations on how people identify gender-wise. As an example, I have a son-in-law who is an award-winning electrician in the state of Utah. He about 2 years ago, he was rated #1 electrician in the state of Utah, and then went to a national competition and was ranked number 17 in the nation as an electrician. And he's a man. He has a full beard. He's behaves as you might expect in a very masculine way as a male electrician in the construction industry. But a few years ago, my daughters kind of invited him to start painting his nails. And he actually now has an ultraviolet light that he uses to harden the acrylic that he paints his nails with. And he paints his nails all the time. He does different color schemes for different holidays and things like that. So here's a man who portrays many of the visual markers that identify him as being very masculine in a traditionally masculine trade, and he loves painting his nails. And I love that because it makes several people in the extended family on both sides rather uncomfortable. But I love the fact that he's found something that he enjoys, that he identifies as part of his persona, that goes counter to cultural expectations on gender norms. I think it's great. Now, I wanted to share a couple of videos where that are discussions on this, and I'm not going to share all of them entirely. All the videos that I include, I do hope that everybody watches them all. When you see them, this is part of the context of this week's course or this week's module. So do watch them and include the information that you gain from them in your weekly reflection. Let's see, I'm going to these ones that I want to show are rather short, and but I hope that people will get something out of them. So let's see. I am doing the screen share thing. Caden, please let me know if you can't hear this, or if you can hear it. Hopefully everything will be just fine. All right, can you see this video?
Yes.
Okay.
In this new series of short films produced in partnership with Google, we look at some of the big ideas that have shaped contemporary art in recent decades and which continue to resonate with artists today. The 1960s witnessed the beginning of a series of dramatic, non-governmental social movements engaged in activism related to the issues of human rights. This was an era of feminism and gay rights, and as a direct result of these movements, from the 1960s onwards, philosophers, social scientists and historians have theorized that gender, roles, characteristics and activities that distinguish men from women are not innate, but socially constructed. Behaviors thought to be feminine or masculine differ from one culture to another and across time periods. Many artists have used their work to examine, question and criticize the relationship between gender and society. As the feminist movement gained momentum in the 1960s and 70s, artists began to challenge traditional roles of women, addressing topics such as women in domestic and public spheres, including, for example, conventional standards of beauty. Artists have also addressed masculinity, investigating how societal pressures and mass media inform and shape our expectations of men. In the case of Modern Art Oxford, the gallery has a long history of engaging in particular with feminism and the politics of gender. Artists such as Marina Abramovic, Tracy Emin, Barbara Kruger, and Yoko Ono, to name just a few examples, have all used their experience as women to make work that critique patriarchal and misogynistic attitudes and behaviors in mainstream society. Whereas more recently, American artist Barbara Kruger and Lynn Hirschman Leeson's exhibitions at the gallery specifically critiqued the constructed nature of gender in relation to the invasive technologies and media of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Artists today continue to explore the increasingly complex territory of gender in the 21st century, looking at the rich spectrum of gender identity and behavior, along with issues relating to sexuality and sex. For more information on previous exhibitions mentioned earlier related to this theme at Modern Art Oxford, please visit our website, where you'll also find links to other artists whose work can be related to gender.
Okay, that is just a really brief overview of some more contemporary work or understanding on gender in art. And again, gender refers to perception and sex refers to biology. And so just keep that in mind as we go forward. I wanted to show something else. A while ago, Harry Styles appeared in, I believe it was Vogue magazine, wearing a dress. And of course, you know, there were people who said, "Oh no, it's the end of the world," kind of thing. But he does some things that are very specifically designed to get people to address their own preconceptions. And so we're just going to watch a little bit of this next video. We're not going to watch an awful lot of it, just some of it, and then we'll move on to the next thing. All right, here we go. Can you see that? Oh, and I did want to acknowledge that Cassidy, thank you very much for coming in.
Hi.
I did notice that you were there. Did you get the email that I sent to everybody?
I did get the email.
Okay, good, excellent. All right, then I'm gonna show this. Can you guys see this video?
Yes.
Yeah.
She ended up going to jail.
Okay, let's see. There we go.
In 1938, Helen Hulick witnessed a burglary and she went to court to testify. Though she was only a witness, she ended up going to jail for 5 days.
Why? Because she was wearing pants. And for women, wearing pants was illegal in the 18th, 19th, and at the beginning of the 20th century. The reason why I'm bringing up this fact is because very recently, Vogue published a photo of pop star Harry Styles in a dress.
The reactions from conservatives were predictable. Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro both denounced the idea that men could wear dresses, calling it the feminization of men.
How can art history enlighten us in this whole controversy? I decided to
Okay, I just want to interject something really quick. And you guys don't have to give me an answer if you don't want to, but I just want to ask the question, why is it wrong for a man to wear a dress? You know, it may be surprising in certain cultural or social situations, and it may be inappropriate in others, you know, for whatever the situation is. But whether or not it's expected, appropriate, or inappropriate, how does that roll over into the idea that something is actually wrong? Would either of you like to touch that, or you want me to just continue? Because I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just looking for somebody, for people to think about that question. Why is the clothing that you wear wrong? So look, I'm going to go ahead and go on.
take a look at this portrait made by Hyacinthe Rigaud in 1701, but I want you to completely forget anything you know about it.
You probably know that this is a famous king, that he's a man, that he's from the 17th century, but I want you to forget that. I know it's probably impossible, but just try.
Now let's look at this person.
We can tell that they're a bit older from their facial features. Because of their age, we can assume that their long black curly hair is a wig. They're wearing baggy clothes with what looks like a pretty heavy and bulky cape. A huge sword sticks out of this cape and rests next to two muscular and well-defined legs. Their posture is elegant, and this elegance is brought to prominence by the delicate high-heeled shoes they're wearing.
Is this masculine? Well, this is Louis XIV, or the Sun King.
He was the King of France between 1643 and 1715, making his reign 72 years long. He's probably one of the best known monarchs of all time, and his importance can't be understated.
But what makes this portrait relevant isn't much who this man is, but how this man was perceived. I remember seeing this painting when I first read *Sapiens*, a book written by history professor Yuval Noah Harari.
It's an amazing book which sold over 12 million copies in the last decade, and it's a brief overview of human history.
Here's what he has to say about this painting.
18th century masculinity, an official portrait of King Louis XIV of France. Note the long wig, stockings, high-heeled shoes, dancer's posture, and huge sword. In contemporary Europe, all these, except for the sword, would be considered marks of effeminacy. But in his time, Louis was a European paragon of manhood and virility.
Harari was using this painting to illustrate the difference between sex and gender. And here's where art history can enlighten us. To explain and to understand this portrait of Louis XIV, we must first acknowledge the fact that masculinity was extremely different in the 18th century, and that therefore masculinity is flexible. The difference between sex and gender is a simple one, but isn't widely understood yet.
Sex is a biological category, and it's determined by biological attributes. A male 400 years ago is the same as a male today. Gender, however, is a cultural category. Gender roles, behaviors, expressions are socially determined. Why do boys like blue and girls like pink? We made it that way. Why do women wear dresses?
What do you guys think about that, seeing that? Louis XIV in the costume he was wearing with his almost ballet type posture, standing and wearing those things. It's interesting to me that the man who made the painting is himself named after a flower. But if we were to look at that from just a surface perspective, it would almost look like this king was on purpose trying to make himself look like a woman for the European audience. But if we look at things from his perspective, from his time period, I think it tells quite a bit of a different story. Because Louis XIV, from what I've read, nobody knows how many children he actually had. And one of the common cons in 19th century America and Europe was to get somebody, it was mostly in the United States, to get somebody to support you by convincing them that you were one of the long lost great grandchildren of Louis XIV, because nobody had an idea how many kids he actually had, because he liked to play around a bit. So, but I think it does raise some really interesting questions. You guys have any responses to that short video? Or that short part that we watched of the video?
I like the comparison, or I liked what it was sharing, and it makes me think of in like the Scottish tradition with the kilts, and how it like the Highland games, and they're like, okay, we're gonna do like feats of strength. They'll put on kilts before like throwing full trees, and how you'd be like, well, wouldn't that be like a garment that's more like traditionally feminine? And it just shows how culturally created the ideas of what gender is.
Yeah, it really demonstrates how culturally created the markers of gender are. Yeah, I think that's really an excellent observation.
Kind of trying to go off of that, like they would like wear the kilts, and personally like it would show off more of the muscles, which has always been considered a very masculine thing. And I think Louis would do the same thing with the tights and the heels, because when you're standing on like your tiptoes, your calves are going to be more showing, and like I think that would be just a good way to kind of promote that, and that's probably what he was going for. And so it just shows like how some things stay the same throughout culture regarding gender, and some things change so drastically.
That's a really good observation too. I love that, because it's, if he wants to show people how manly he is, he's showing off his gigantic sword there, then it makes sense to have the high heels, because that does show off his well-defined calves. So excellent point. I love that. Here's we're going to watch another part of another thing. I just want to show this really briefly. I'd like you to watch the whole video, of course, but I just want to kind of start this idea, because I think that this is really a good question, and I want to show what this artist is doing.
Sukupuolten välinen tasa-arvo, mikä nyt Suomessa tietenkin on globaalisti aika pitkällä, niin meillä on silti semmoisia maskuliinisuuden ja feminiinisuuden linnakkeita. Ja se, että mä törmäytän omissa töissä näitä kahta eri maailmaa, kovaa ja pehmeätä, herkkää ja vähän vähemmän herkkää eri materiaaleista, niin se on mulle myös semmoista tasa-arvotyötä. Se, että mä myös itse miespuolisena teen jotain semmoisia, mitkä on hirveän feminiinisiä perinteisesti. Katutaiteen ja pitsinypläyksen välillä ei suoranaisesti ole paljon mitään yhtäläisyyksiä, ja sen takia se onkin just älyttömän hyvä aihepiiri ottaa katutaiteeseen, koska se väkisinkin pakottaa ihmisen ajattelemaan, koska on asia jossakin täysin vieraassa kontekstissa. Mä luulen, että katsotaide pystyy Pohjoismaissa yhdistämään ihmisiä sitä kautta, että jos se ammentaa jostain luonnosta, yhteiskunnasta, kielestä, kulttuurista, vaikka uskonnollisesta taustoista, mikä on yhteistä meille. Ja sitä kautta, kun on samanlainen kokemusmaailma ja tausta eri puolilla Pohjoismaita, niin sitten ihmiset pystyy tarkastelemaan sitä ja kokemaan.
Actually, there's just a couple seconds left of this. We'll go ahead and answer this.
Katutaiteilijoista Suomessa ehkä enemmän tiedetään miespuolisia, jonka takia se leimautuu helposti miesten jutuksi tai maskuliiniseksi, mutta itsessään taidemuotona siinä ei ole mitään, mikä ohjaa sitä oikeastaan kumpaankaan suuntaan, että mahdollisuudethan joka suuntaan kaikille. Ja sitä kautta mä näen sen semmoisena tasa-arvon taiteena.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. I love this. He's a Finnish artist who is a tatting artist. What he was doing is a specific type of lace making that involves tying knots and holding everything in place with pins. And it is traditionally perceived as a very feminine medium. It's something that you have to do sitting still and holding it in your lap. And for a long time, it was considered a very feminine medium. And what I love about this artist, and I can't remember his name, I'm really sorry about that, is that he will do, you saw some examples of his tatting, making this lace. The subject of the lace or the designs of the lace kind of reflect a street art sensibility. And then his street art, when he welds things together, kind of reflect the lacing sensibility that he also does. There's this kind of artwork, even though it was traditionally for women in particularly the United States, during World War I, when men burned their hands or came home from wars with hand injuries, they were prescribed tatting to kind of help get their dexterity back. And Brigham Young, who's a guy who kind of established Utah as a territory, he considered himself very masculine. Other people considered him very masculine. He had a number of wives, all markers of masculinity, but he also bragged that he could outsweep and outdust any woman in the valley. And he was also created many of these tatting doilies as well. He was a master lace artist as well. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. What do you think of that idea or that question? Is art gendered, or does art have gender?
I mean, going back, I can't remember what period it was, but there's certain periods of art where like women weren't allowed to do art, like painting and sculpting. Like it was seen as a very masculine thing to do. I think it's like Renaissance type stuff, especially when they had the big art schools and art galleries. Like it was considered a man's job to make art and stuff. And especially like the bigger artists, it was like a very masculine thing.
Yeah, and even though there are examples of women that were artists during the Renaissance, for example, it's like 1 out of 1,000, maybe, if that, but it was predominantly very male. And even like theater during the similar period in Europe, while Shakespeare was alive in England, women were never allowed to be up on the stage, and all the roles had to be performed by men. And so the idea of gender had to become somewhat fluid because, of course, in Shakespeare's plays, there are many protagonists who are women, you know, and since they had to be only portrayed, and it was a legal issue, they could only be portrayed by men, then these men had to dress and accoutre themselves so that visually they could be associated as women, and they had to take on behaviors and change their voice so that they sounded like women. You know, or at least the expectations of women that people had, the theater going audience had at the time. So yeah, there's some really interesting observations we can make. And if somebody does argue that art is gendered, I would have to say that it's only gendered in relation to its own contemporary cultural context, because it does change from time to time. There are some cultures where only men can be the tattoo artist, and other cultures where only women can be tattoo artists. There are some roles where, or some media that only men can do in some places and only women can do in others. So I think that if art is gendered, then the markers of that gendering are specific to the cultural context of the people producing the art. But I think that that's a really good realization to have. Now I want to show another video. This is talks about representation of the human form in sculpture. And I'm wondering, actually, no, I'll have you guys watch that. That's going to be part of the next section of this same module, leading into ancient art. And rather, I want to watch a little bit about Mesopotamia and have a short discussion about that. Let's see. No, I don't. No, I don't think we have time enough for that. I would like you to watch the video about Mesopotamia and see what you can gather regarding that kind of gendering of the individual in Mesopotamian art. What I do want to do is, we're also looking at Egyptian art. I want to talk a little bit about the role of women in Egypt and then we can, we'll look at some Egyptian art and stuff and see how that is reflected as well. Let's see. Give me just a short half an hour here as I share the screen on this video. All right.
And could run their own businesses. Did you know that women in ancient Egypt had almost equal rights and could run their own businesses? Hello and welcome to World History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly and today's video is all about the lives of women in ancient Egypt. Don't forget, the easiest way to support us is by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell icon for notifications so you don't miss out on any new uploads. World History Encyclopedia is a non-profit organization and you can find us on Patreon, a brilliant site where you can support our work and receive exclusive benefits in return. Your support helps us create videos twice a week. So make sure to check it out via the pop-up in the top corner of the screen or via the Patreon link down below. In ancient Egypt, the central cultural value was ma'at, or harmony. This concept of harmony was for all aspects of life, and balance could be seen throughout the government, religious practices, art and architecture, and even the gender roles of the civilization. Compared to many other ancient cultures, women had it pretty well off in ancient Egypt. They were fairly equal in all things, except for their occupations, where men were in positions of authority, like part of the government, the king, a general, and head of the family. The women worked in domestic spheres. With that being said, women still held considerable autonomy, power, and authority. Women could marry who they wanted, then choose to divorce them. They could hold land and property, they could travel, and to some extent, choose their profession. Not to mention, female deities oversaw important responsibilities in ancient Egyptian religion, or, as it is known today, mythology. There are many different ancient Egyptian creation myths, but in the most popular one, either Atum or the goddess Neith, begins creation at the primordial mound, surrounded by the primordial waters, personified as Nu and Neonet. Even from the very beginning, it was a balance of female and male principles. This harmony would be continuously upheld between the genders, and following the creation of the universe and the beginning of time, women continued to be regarded as important. Women's pivotal role can be seen in the myth of Osiris and Isis, where it was up to Isis to bring her brother husband back to life, and who gives birth to Horus and raises him to be king. Not only that, but Isis is helped by other goddesses, including Nephthys, Serket, and Neith, to restore balance to Egypt after Osiris's brother, Set, usurped power. The goddess Tenenet was the goddess of beer, the drink of the gods, and also provided the Egyptians with the recipe to brew it. Other notable goddesses are Seshat, the goddess of the written word and librarians, Tayet, the goddess of weaving, Hathor, the goddess of joy, celebration, and the afterlife, Bastet, a protector of women, the home, and women's secrets, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. The goddess Kebhet, daughter of Anubis, brought cool, refreshing water to the souls of the dead awaiting judgment. And a number of other goddesses, like Nephthys, were also associated with the afterlife and comforting the souls of the departed. Egyptian religion honored and elevated the feminine, so it is hardly surprising that women were important members of the clergy and temple life. Women were able to hold important religious positions, with the most important being God's wife of Amun, a position that began in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt between 2040 and 1782 BCE. There were actually many different God's wives positions for numerous deities, and the God's wife of Amun was just one of them.
Some of the things I wanted to talk about really quickly is she mentions Seshet, the goddess of librarians. Her husband's name was Thoth, and he was the god of science and writing. And both of them, they oversaw essentially storage and communication of knowledge. And one thing that people don't really dwell on an awful lot now is that in Egyptian religion, most of the time, deities that were generally considered positive had a vengeful half as well. And so Bastet, who is the cat-headed goddess that everybody thinks about when they think of cats in Egypt, she's the protector of the home. She's the guardian of the hearth. But if somebody invaded the home, then her sister Sekhmet would rise up, and instead of being the goddess of cats, she's the goddess of lions, and so she's the half that's a little bit more vengeful. And so all these the female deities that we think of in the Western world as protectors and somehow nurturing, they always had another female deity who was their sister, who represented the vengeful counterpoint or the violent counterpoint to the nurturing image that people see, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But in this, the idea of Mot, it's also the name of the goddess who holds the sky. In Greek religion, it was Atlas, and it was Mot who held up the heavens. A woman who was the only person who was powerful enough to do that in the Egyptian faith was a woman. I just thought that was really interesting. And sometimes we can see that in their art, and a lot of the times it seems that the art that we see is very driven by masculinity. Do you folks remember the conversation we had about the most powerful king in Egyptian history, the most powerful ruler? Do you remember that name?
That was the one who was a woman, right?
Right, Hatshepsut. She was a queen, but very briefly, because after her husband died, she had herself declared a man so that she could be the king or the ruler of Egypt. And it was interesting to me. It's interesting to me because the way that she accrued power for Egypt and expanded Egypt's influence was not through overt warfare, but it was through trade agreements and contracts that she made with neighboring kingdoms. And so they became wealthy. Egypt became even more wealthy because essentially of cooperation with surrounding nations. But then when her son became kind of his own guy, and she deemed him educated enough, she stepped down, and then she reverted to, or I want to say revert because she returned back to her identity as a woman, and then lived out her life as a priestess. So very interesting. Now I wanted to share another brief video, and we may or may not find it advantageous to have sound in it, but again, I want you guys to watch it.
Family was important in maintaining social order and acted as the building blocks of society. Most importantly, family provided and allowed for social security and safety after death. In the following video, we will examine the Stela of Maya and take a deeper look at the role family played in funerary rites.
Before we begin examining the stela, we must first contextualize the artifact. The stela.
Okay, this is what we're looking at. A stela or a stela is usually a stone tablet. Sometimes it'll be more three-dimensional. It may have carving on both sides, but it's essentially something that was stone and carved into with particular messages and images that was intended as part of a burial site. So it could be a marker for the burial site, or it could be an addendum to the marker for a burial site with some sort of monument associated with somebody who's important enough who could afford having such a thing. But we'll look at this a little bit more. Let's see if I can make this image just a little bit bigger. Okay.
The Stela of Maya was made during the New Kingdom at the end of the 18th dynasty, approximately from 1353 through 1292 BC. The New Kingdom was often referred to as ancient Egypt's golden age because it was a time of wealth, prosperity, and power. By the end of the 18th dynasty, stelae were increasingly inserted into the facades of tombs. This meant that the stelae were inserted into the faces of the tombs themselves. The Stela of Maya was found in tomb 338 at Deir el-Medina. Deir el-Medina is an ancient Egyptian village. It is located on the outskirts of Thebes, which acted as the capital of Egypt during the 18th dynasty. It was also near the Valley of Kings and Queens. The Valley of Kings and Queens is considered the final resting place for royal elites. Deir el-Medina is the village that housed the artisans who built the Valley of Kings and Queens. Because Deir el-Medina was home to artisans and craftsmen, it is no surprise that many stelae were found there. According to the hieroglyphics on Maya stela, Maya, the man who owned the stela, was a draftsman.
I want to interject really quick. Deir el-Medina, Dr. Al-Wasi, who is the head of Egyptian antiquities right now, he has overseen several kind of digs and excavations of Deir el-Medina, this area. And one of the things that they discovered just in the last 15 years is that everybody thought that only men were the ones that created the tombs and did the construction. But he was able to find out that, or ever to validate the idea that there were women that lived in these construction cities as well. Because in between the times when the Nile flooded and there was intense farming activity, most of the year people had nothing to do other than to eat and poop, basically. And so construction cities were built where workers would go, they would live away from their families and several weeks at a time. this is where there would be, there's a lot of evidence of really advanced medicine because people who got broken legs or head injuries survived at least 20 or 30 years after the injury. So evidence that people really knew how to take care of themselves and each other. But there was also evidence that women worked at these sites as well as craftspeople, constructing a lot of these ancient tombs.
In ancient Egypt were scribes who specialized in drawing. He was a painter employed at the Theban necropolis and lived at Deir el Medina during the late 18th dynasty. Now that we have determined that the Stela of Maya is a funerary stela, let's get a grasp on the background. As you can see, there are 3 registers separated by 2 horizontal lines, which results in a total of 3 separate scenes. In the upper register, we see Osiris accompanied by Hathor in seated positions facing Maya and his wife, Tamiet. In the middle register, Maya and his wife are seated facing 3 of their children. Finally, in the bottom register, we see 6 more of their children. The stela's registers indicate a decrease in importance from top to bottom, clearly defining status, which is why we see the divine figures in the upper register and the children figures in the lower register.
What I would like to point out in this, I hope you guys can see this, is as we go down, here you see 3 of the children. And that this figure on the bottom left might very well be a baby as well. And then the 6 children at the bottom, a lot of the times when you would see the shaven head, that was a mark that it was a person of either really low status or a very young child. And then can you tell among these 3 figures which ones are women and which ones are men? Sorry, can you guys see the same thing I'm seeing on my screen?
Yeah, can you ask the question one more time?
Can you tell which of these figures are male and which are female?
Yes.
Which are the female?
The female would be the 2 in the center.
Yeah, these 2.
Yeah.
Exactly. And generally, these 3 are going to be younger sons or sons of lower position and status. And this is going to be an older son or a son with higher position because he can afford a wig. And there's evidence to suggest that most everybody who could afford to would shave their heads and wear a wig. Men and women both wore the same kind of makeup in the same spots. And other than that, I think we see, yes, we can tell that these are women, and I think it's interesting to me that they are holding that this couple's daughters are holding items that are just as important as the young men and as his sons are. And I think it's also interesting that the 2 daughters are of a higher status than 3 of their brothers. Rather than just relegated to end of the line because they're girls. Now this is a really weird shaped guy. His name is Akhenaten. He tried to establish a different kind of religion in Egypt, and he was incredibly wealthy, so he was able to do that and establish it while he was alive. But he also really elevated the women in his life higher than in status than they'd ever. It was unprecedented. It was they were never women up to the point of Akhenaten's rulership were never as elevated, as high in status as during his reign. And after he died, even though a lot of people tried to return things back to the way it was before he got into power, still women retained a lot of their political rights that they had gained under his reign. So I'd really like you guys to watch this whole thing. And we can see right here, we're talking about Maya and his wife, and I'm sorry, I do not remember her name. But the reason why they're a little bit smaller up here and bigger here is because here's Osiris and his wife, Hathor. And then down here, this couple has kind of switched places cognitively with the two gods here. So this is the couple right here, you know, the earthbound couple, and they're being shown bigger than the other people, not because they were giants, not, you know, they're not 18 feet tall or whatever here. It's a marker of status. In Egyptian canonical art, generally the larger body represents higher status culturally or spiritually. And so, you know, we have the three of the sons here, a fourth one here, two daughters, and three more sons, with the smaller ones being either lesser status or younger in this case. That's why I'm thinking that this is not, I think that this might be a very young child. And maybe this is three of the children, while one of her children was still very tiny. And it was a significant time. They were just in the family's life. And maybe that's why they positioned a baby there to kind of contextualize this in the life of the family. So I don't think I'm going to put on the sound again, but I would like you, oh, Tamit, that's the name of the wife. I'm sorry. So it's Maya and Tamit. And then I mentioned Irnefet is the child right here. And so there we have the names of the three of the children that are shown there. And then here's names of the children that are shown here. So this guy, this couple had a really big family. And then here we see this is another monument to a family where we have the father's name is Kedamun, and he is sitting with his wife. It's knowing that size is also an indicator of status in these records. It's interesting to me that he and his wife are the same height, and then their child sits in between them, and they are holding, instead of him holding his arms as mimicking a ruler, as Maya is shown here, his arms are being kind of mirroring a little bit of Osiris' arms. You see that he's holding something similar to one of the markers that Osiris holds to indicate that he's the ruler. We see that right here. What do you notice about their poses here? Can you tell if one is more important than the other just by their poses?
No, they're pretty identical.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating, because he's indicating, because the sculptor is indicating that at least in the minds of this couple, this family, they're of the same status. I think that's fascinating. So we didn't look at an awful lot of art right here. I'm going to put up a couple other videos with more art in it that you'll see by tomorrow evening. And when you do your reflection, I know that I've asked everybody to include 3 things of art, but I want to, when you do your weekly reflection, as much as you can, find 3 elements of art. And like on this time, I think there's another video that talks about Mesopotamian art, as well as there's another video that talks about the view of the human form portrayed in sculpture through antiquity. You can draw your art pieces from any of the videos throughout the week's work that we look at. I'm sorry, I forgot I was on camera. I didn't mean to share my ultra relaxed pose. A teacher should always be dignified, I suppose. But as you go through this and watch these videos, I am really appreciating the points that you guys are bringing out. I think if we can separate ourselves from the idea that gender is immutable, I think we're going to be a lot more comfortable and a lot more open to the things that we can learn looking at cultural portrayals of human beings through history. I believe that that's important because I think we have a lot to learn from people, not as a critique of our present society, but just the process of, hey Chuck, just the process of, oh, excuse me, just a second. Thank you, sir. Just the process of learning about other cultures and how they viewed things in their own corners of the world can help us expand our own perspectives and I think help us to become better people ourselves too. You know, so it's not just about learning what we can learn, it's also about expanding ourselves so we can become better as individuals. But any thoughts on the things that we've talked about today? Anything that was very interesting to you, looking at stuff in Egypt or even Finland?
I know I've always liked different like Egyptian gods and whatnot. And so hearing about like the different roles of the Egyptian gods, both male and female, was very interesting to me.
It is absolutely fascinating. And I was a little disappointed in that video because it seemed like she almost was dismissive of, you know, historical Egyptian religion by referring to it as mythology. Because I think I mentioned it in this class. Mythology or myth actually means spoken truth. That's what the word means. And mythology is what is behind our concept of religion. Myth is the thing, the set of knowledge that is being expressed through the observance of a religion. And so at its core, myth is not a fantasy, but myth is more real than real. You know, it's the truth that helps us to categorize and process the truth that we encounter. So and that's something that makes it very fascinating to me because in Egyptian religion, historical Egyptian religion, it seemed to be less that people were identifying with all these entirely separate beings and more that maybe these beings represented different facets of the idea of that hyperconscious, an individual represented facets of an overarching larger idea of a deity. But you know, that's a conversation for a philosophy class that we can have. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I loved when I found out that these women deities, the female deities, had the more pleasant, supportive face that we're all very familiar with, but they also had a darker sister who was the one responsible for things like vengeance and violence. You know, the violent counterpoint to her kinder sister. That opened up a much bigger window of understanding and appreciation for me. Because if we want to look at just, I think a lot of us have a woman in our lives that we see as being the nurturing protector, you know, the one who is a provider and carer. But then when somebody crossed her, or she felt that her charges were in danger, she became the mama bear, and you were not going to mess with her and survive. You know, I think that's, is that safe to say that most of us have that, and a figure like that in our lives?
Yeah, I know,
And
I definitely do.
yeah, and I just love the fact that that's codified in Egyptian historical religion. That's just amazing. All right, any other observations?
I like
Or any
their
last
emphasis
questions?
on balance. It's not that they were trying to do anything like throw a bone or like fill a quota to have women represented. It was logical. It was balance. It was these, like you're pointing out, like sometimes we associate strength with masculinity, but femininity has strength too. The same way, one of the most dangerous things you'll cross in nature is like a mother bear or a mother anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Mother moose,
Yeah,
a mother
excellent.
whatever.
Yeah,
So that women femininity has strength too, but our culture kind of starts to define what is the appropriate way to show that. So by looking at it with a bird's eye view over like all of human history, we can kind of pick and choose for ourselves a little bit more of what we and our worldview, I guess.
yeah. I think that those are excellent perceptions. The idea of balance as opposed to getting the right statistical numbers to show your constituents that you care. You know, I think that's an excellent point. And it's interesting you would bring that because the oldest cultures and the oldest systems of faith have this kind of rather consistent idea of balance that's necessary to the longevity or success of the culture. I really like that. Like in Taoist philosophy, it's the yin and yang principles, and where the yang is usually associated with the feminine, you know, the sacred or divine feminine, and the role of the yang is it represents that which is moved upon, and yin, which is, or do I have those reversed? I think the yin is the feminine, that which is moved upon, and yang is that which acts or moves. And the idea that both are necessary and they must be in balance. And when things are falling apart, it's because one of those is out of balance, and it's not because there's a desperate need to satisfy your constituents and prove statistical balance. That's an excellent observation, Cassidy. Thank you. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any further questions, I will put this recording up on YouTube and have everybody see it. And I should have everything updated by most likely it'll be tomorrow. And we'll continue our conversation later this week and through email if you guys have questions, and then moving forward to next week as well. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday.
Thank you.
You guys have a absolutely wonderful week, and we will see you next week.
Awesome. See you next week.
Okay.